From wishing him the best for his future to getting drunk and almost fighting the Stockton brawler, this is why Dana White doesn't want Nate Diaz back in the octagon. The UFC boss just hopes that his former fighter does well. You see, guys, Nate is locked up in a boxing match against Jake Paul. The bout is still some way away, as it's expected to happen on August 5th, but it has been made official. Obviously, the MMA community is abuzz with the news, because they want to see their favorite fighter take on the YouTuber. Even though Nate parted ways with the UFC last year, he still has a lot of fans who'd want to see him fight. Dana was asked about the upcoming boxing match during a recent interview and whether he sees Diaz coming back to the UFC roster, but he didn't really know how to respond to that. The UFC president did admit that he loved Nate though, and that he hopes that his former prodigy makes $1 zillion. White also said that he doesn't want to on other people's fights because he has absolutely no stakes in the match between Diaz and Paul. So, unlike Oscar De La Weirdo, he won't comment on stuff that is of no concern to him. Dana did look a little awkward answering this question. Of course, he didn't want to come right out and say that he doesn't want to see Nate back in the octagon, but at the same time, he couldn't afford to make any false promises to the fans. The Stockton brawler has been one of the top dogs in the UFC for years now, and he almost always guaranteed a huge draw for Dana and company. They might have had their differences in the past, but they've made each other a lot of money over the years. So you can bet that they won't be looking to burn any bridges. Nate sure wants to return to the UFC. He has said time and time again that MMA is something he wants to do till the end of his days. This boxing stint is just so he can make a little extra cash and show the rest of the MMA fighters how it's done. Athletes from the UFC haven't been as successful in their transition to boxing, so Nate just wants to prove a point there. He wants to establish himself as the king of combat sports, and Jake Paul just happens to be the perfect target for him. The problem child has dominated some of the best UFC fighters in boxing matches so far. He's taken on and beaten legends such as Anderson Silva, Tyron Woodley, and Ben Askren. So if Nate can somehow win, he'll have all the bragging rights. Plus, there's the matter of money as well. You all know for a fact that boxing pays far better than MMA. Going up against a guy as popular as Jake guarantees a fat paycheck. For Diaz, this fight ticks all the right boxes. And on top of that, he stands a real chance against the problem child. The 38-year-old has been known to be a real brawler. He has phenomenal cardio, which ensures he could go strong in the later parts of a match, and he could slug it out for days. Now I know he may not be the most technical boxer, but neither is Jake. I mean, sure, the YouTuber has shown some skills in the ring, but he's nowhere near as good of a boxer. In fact, he was exposed against Tommy Fury, going for big shots, trying to land those overhand rights that could be seen from miles away. If he does the same against a guy like Nate, you can all guess how it's going to end. The Stockton brawler can eat those punches all day, and if he fires back, then it's unlikely that Jake is going to survive for too long. So if the match boils down to an actual brawl, then you know that Diaz will have the upper hand. The only problem is that returning to the UFC for him won't be as easy. Dana and Jake aren't on the best terms. Everyone knows that, and you all know how petty Dana can get. Now that Nate might be out there looking to make money and a name for himself, but Dana might not see it that way, especially because Jake has been campaigning against the UFC for years now. The problem child is very vocal on the issue of fighters' pay, and that the UFC boss keeps the biggest slice of the pie for himself. The conversation hasn't been too civil either. Both Dana and Jake have thrown insults at each other every chance they've gotten. Just a couple of months ago, the influencer boxer reignited this feud. He's looking to form a union for the fighters that would ensure much better pay for them, in addition to a proper healthcare plan. But White wasn't budging from his stance. He maintained that the fighters are paid well enough and that they won't ever come out and reveal their salaries, even though there's nothing stopping them from doing so. The UFC head honcho went as far to say that Jake can start his own MMA promotion and see how things work out for him. This particular war may have been between Dana and the problem child, but Nate's had his fair share of issues with the promotion as well. Just last year, the Stockton brawler told Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour that the UFC has been holding him hostage. Apparently, they weren't offering him any fights because they didn't want to let him get out of his contract. Eventually, he landed a match against Tony Ferguson that released him out of his contract jail, but not before a lot of back and forth between Diaz and his boss. Dana obviously denied any such claims of holding him hostage. He explained that they can't keep him there against his will, because then they'd have to compensate him for sitting on the sidelines. White wasn't too pleased with Nate for that stuff, and told the media that he's always saying something crazy. Dana also revealed that the matchmakers have tried to get Nate to sign a contract multiple times, but he just didn't want to take any fights. That may have some truth to it, because Diaz said that the only guys worth fighting on the roster back then were Israel Adesanya and Francis Ngannou. Of course, the UFC couldn't just hand him a title shot like that, so White's frustration was pretty understandable. This isn't the first time Diaz has caused headaches for the boss either. He's also asked for more money in the past. In 2014, when he was pretty young and an exciting prospect, he was pretty vocal. There were times when Nate expressed his displeasure at what the promotion was paying him. He revealed that he received $60,000 for showing up to a fight and another $60,000 for winning. That's pretty decent if you ask me, but the Stockton brawler wasn't happy with it at all, because his brother Nick and some other fighters were getting paid a lot more. There was also the fact that even back then, Nate was very popular among the fans, so people were willing to pay good money to see him fight. Obviously, Uncle Dana didn't agree with that, because the only way to make more money was to fight and win. Nate wasn't doing that as much back then, so he had no reason to complain about getting paid less. These issues may have started way back in the day, but they continue to this day. Now, there's another factor in play that doesn't help Nate's case: his age. At 38 now, he's no spring chicken who can take as much punishment. The new talent is also getting pretty darn good, so Nate doesn't really have a solid place on the UFC roster anymore. Now, I'm not saying that people won't pay to watch him fight, but it's just not going to be the same anymore. It also doesn't make much sense for Dana to go through all the headaches of keeping Nate around. You guys already know that he's a handful to deal with, so it just might not be worth it for the promotion. He has no title aspirations, and he can't really hang with the best anymore. To be perfectly honest, he's more likely to get into a fight against Dana himself, which they almost did. Oh yes, it happened, guys. Nate actually revealed that they were at an after-party together, and the UFC boss had had a little too much to drink. The two got into an argument about money. Things must have gotten pretty serious because Diaz said they almost ended up actually fighting. Dana was asked about what happened recently by a reporter, and he started laughing. "Allegedly," he said. Then he just tried to get out of that by asking the reporters if they had any other questions. They were drinking, so it was probably just a one-off thing. There's no doubt that there's been a lot of mutual love and respect between UFC and Nate over so many years. Yes, there may have been disagreements in the past, but in the end, they definitely won apart on good terms. So, from getting drunk and almost fighting the Stockton brawler, to wishing him the best for his future, this is why Dana White doesn't want Nate Diaz back in the octagon.